Okay, today we are going to be looking at Math Mammoth Lesson 6A, which starts on page 58 and goes through page 59. The title of the section is Solving Proportions 1, Equivalent Rates. Okay, now before we get started, let's just take a minute to think about some of these words here. First of all, equivalent. We're talking about two things that have the same amount of quantity, even though they may look a little different, like $1 and 4/4 are equivalent. Okay? Rates, we've already talked about, is when you are comparing two things that have different units, like inches to time, or distance to time, or some other two units that are different. Okay? The new word that we have today is proportions, and so we're going to be looking at what that means and how we use the ideas that we've used so far, or that we've learned so far, to solve something called a proportion. Okay, so let's look at an example. First of all, and let's write this down. Let me write this down and talk about this. When two ratios or rates are set to be equal, so you have two ratios or either two rates, and you set them to be equal with an equal sign. Alright, we call the resulting equation, and remember, if we have an equal sign between two things, that's an equation. We call that resulting equation a proportion. So whenever you see two rates that are equal to each other, you can know that that is called a proportion. For example, if you have 20 kilometers in 30 minutes, that's a rate, and you have equals, and then you have another rate, and you could have something on the bottom where you could just have a variable down there, but you have these two fractions that are equal to each other, these two ratios, and so that whole thing is called a proportion. Okay? You're comparing two different ratios, and you're setting them equal, so they're equal in that they're equivalent, even though the numbers are a little different. They still represent the same rate or ratio. Alright, now let's go to the next screen. Alright, so here's another one. Here we have 7/8 equals 21 over 24. Now, in this case, we don't have any units, but we do have a ratio equal to another ratio. Alright, and these are equivalent because I can show that if I take the first one and multiply it by 3 and multiply this by 3 by the same number, which actually is the same as multiplying by 1, 3 over 3 is 1, then I do get 21 over 24. Alright, so these are equivalent ratios, and so that whole thing, the whole thing is called a proportion. Okay? Alright, so how do we solve an equivalent ratio or rate problem? Well, let's look at an example that is on page 58, is where I've been working from. In where it says method 1, equivalent ratios and rates. Okay. Alright, so your example, or the example that they have, is that 20 erasers cost $1.90, and the question is, how much would 22 erasers cost? And you probably could answer that question just by doing some calculations, but let's talk about a new way that we can solve it. Okay, so let's go to the next slide so I can have more room. Alright, so we're going to set up a ratio, or a rate actually here, with what we know. We know 20 erasers cost $1.90. And we're going to set up a proportion. So we're going to say that equals 22 erasers. And we don't know how much that costs, so that's going to be our X. Alright? Or you could use any other letter. Now, what we're going to think about is, what can we multiply the top and bottom numbers of the first rate by to get the second? In other words, what can I multiply this by, and multiply this by, to get this second rate? Well, I'm asking myself, what can I multiply 20 by to get 22? Alright? Well, and we're going to call that number that we're looking for P. And that is our proportion. So, how do we find out what that P is that we need to multiply 20 by to get 22? Well, 20 times P has to give me 22, right? So to find P, I can use division. So I know that since these are two factors that equal 22, that I can divide 22 by 20, and that will give me the P that I need to multiply by. Alright, so if I divide 22 by 20, and you can do that out to the side, and I'm going to add a 0 and a decimal, I'll get 1.1. So P equals 1.1. So that means if I multiply by 1.1, 20 by 1.1, I'll get 22. And so I have to multiply the same number at the bottom. And so 1.90 times 1.1 should give me the number of erasers. Okay, so if we multiply 1.90 times 1.1, we will get, and I'll let you do this to verify, but you should get $2.09. Okay, you may have to round off, but remember with money we want 2 decimal places. So that's the method. Alright, you're always trying to find the number that you need to multiply by on top and bottom that will give you an equivalent rate or ratio. Alright, so let's look at another example. Alright, this is another example that you have on page 58. This one says a car can travel 56 miles with 3.2 gallons of gas. question is, how far can it go with 7.9 gallons of gas? Alright, so the first thing we need to do is set up our proportion. Remember the two rates, so let's write down what we know together. That's 56 miles goes with 3.2 gallons of gas. That's one rate. Well, then we have an equal sign and we set up our other rate. And we know we have 7.9 gallons of gas, so we have to put that at the bottom because over here the gallons are at the bottom, so we need that to match. And then our miles will be at the top, and that's what we're trying to find. How many miles can we go on 7.9 gallons of gas? Alright, so how do we solve this? Well, we're going to ask ourselves, what do I need to multiply 3.2 by to get 7.9? I'll call that a P. And then that same number we're going to multiply on the top, and that will give us 56 times that number will give us the number of miles. Okay, so since we know 3.2 gallons gives us 7.9 miles, 3.2 gallons times some number gives us 7.9 gallons. If we could just find this number P, we would be good to go. So how can we find it? Well, we can take 7.9, see this is 3.2, let's go to the next page. We have 3.2 times some number P equals 7.9, and so we can find P by taking 7.9 and dividing by the 3.2. Alright, and of course you're going to do that somewhere on your paper out to the side. Alright, and what is that going to give you? Well, if you remember, one of the things we have to do when we have a decimal outside here is we have to move it over to the end of the number, but however many places we moved it, we move that one place over, we have to move this one place over. So I'm going to put my decimal there, and let's see about the division. So 3.2 goes, or 32 goes into 79, be 2 times. Alright, so that's 4 and 6, subtract, and we get 15. And then if I add another 0, let's see, 4, and that'll be an 8 and 12. And so if I subtract there, I get 22, okay? And you'll have to carry this division out. They carried it out, and I'm running out of room. Here, maybe I need to go to the next slide. Let me try that again. All right, let's do 7.9. 7.9 divided by 3.2. We have 2. Oh, I need to move my decimal over. So it's here. Okay. All right. And that was 64. Subtract. Bring down my next 0. There's a decimal here. This will be 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. Subtract. Okay, and of course you have to borrow. Okay, bring down your next 0. 32 goes into 220. let's try 6. 6 times 2 is 12. Carry 1. 6 times 3 is 18, 19. Subtract. That's 8. And this is going to be 11 minus 9, which is 2. Bring down another 0. That is going to be, I believe, 8. 8 times 2 is 16. Carry 1. 24, 25. Okay. 4, 2. And you do another 0. You get 7 here. And you can keep on going. But usually if you have at least that many decimal places, you should be good to go. So now going back to our problem, the ratio that we had was 56 miles, or the rate was 3.2 gallons, and we're going to try to figure out how many miles we could go if we had 7.9 gallons. And so we've just figured out that the number that we need to multiply by is 2.4685 if you divide it on out, okay? And so we've got to do we have to multiply the top number by that number. Alright, and that will give us what we're looking for here, how many miles. Alright, so we have to do that multiplication, and if we do 2.46875 times 56, that's going to be a lot of numbers to multiply, but if you do it, you will get, let's do it, that's 30, 42, 45. 6 times 8 is 48, plus 4 is 52. 6 times 6 is 36, plus 5 is 41. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 4 is 28. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 2 is 14. And then multiplying everything by 5. 5 times, put your 0 down. 5 times 5 is 25. Carry a 2. 5 times 7, 35. 36, 37. Carry a 3. 5 times 8 is 40, plus 3 is 43. Carry a 4. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 4 is 34. Carry a 3. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 3 is 23. Carry a 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Now, go back and do this yourself to make sure you're getting the same thing. I'm doing it quickly. Twelve, 8, 3, 1. And remember, when you're multiplying, you have to count the number of decimal places that you have. So I have 5 there, and I'm multiplying by 56, which there's no decimal places on 56 because the decimal is at the end of the number. So my answer should have 5 decimal places. So I should have a decimal here. So my answer then is 138.25 miles is how many miles that I could go if I had 7.9 gallons of gas. Alright? So the method then is to set up your proportions and then figure out what number you need to multiply by in each case, and they are saying that you can use a calculator to figure this number out. So when we did this division back on the previous slide here, you can use a calculator for that part. That would have made it a lot easier, wouldn't it? Okay, so do that, and that's on page 58. and also on page 59. So you're going to have a few problems like that, and let me just show you this. Every one of your problems you're going to have a rate that you set up here with some, you're going to write down, and you're going to have an equal sign, then you can have another rate over here, and you're just going to have to figure out what number you have to multiply by on top and bottom to get the numbers on the right. Okay? And this is the part you can use your calculator for when you do that division that you need to do. Alright, so your homework then is to do the problems on pages 58 and 59. And that's all for today. See you next time.